Hi, everyone, and thank you for watching the video. This video is about the Azure Synapse Analytics security. So lots of questions about Synapse security specifically, what roles to give over the users from on the level of the Azure RBAC, like the Azure Resource Manager, Azure or the Synapse roles. How can we do something like getting the users to uh, enable the interactive authoring without having permissions, high privilege permissions like contributor or owner? This is a common question. Common question is, what's the relation between the users in the SQL dedicated pools and the rest of Synapse? It seems the dedicated pool has its own special treatment when it comes to security. That's something we will discuss it. However, before we even start, I would highly recommend that you look first to your team, have a scheme of roles and responsibilities that you would like to have for your own users, and then start applying this to the technology, whatever the technology is, whether it's Synapse or something else. But we should start from what you have already in your team. What skill set? What are the permissions that you need to give to your team? How can you create a hierarchy of approvals in your team? That's all needs to be resolved first before we go into the technology. Anyways, we will see this in a moment. See you. At the beginning of our discussion about the Synapse analytics rules and responsibility, I want to highlight the different systems that we have when it comes to the authentication and authorization inside Synapse. First of all, let's go with the flow from the top to the bottom. First, we have Azure itself and all the RBAC roles in Azure. The three main roles: reader, contributor, owner. When you have a contributor permission over a Synapse workspace, that will reflect into the second level, which is the workspace. When you have a reader permission, that means you can see it using the UI to log into the workspace. Role will be, owner as well will be mapped to the Synapse administrator. We can also have custom roles, and during the demo today, I have some use cases for custom roles as well. So this is all inside one level. Now there is a second level where there is a connection between both. So if you are a contributor or an owner, you are mapped to the Synapse administrator. There is also Synapse SQL Administrator that is giving you access only to the serverless pools here. So the resources that we are having access to will be regarding SQL, we have the dedicated pools, the serverless pools. There are the Spark pools, the pipelines, and beneath them there is the storage. So whatever permission that you are giving in the workspace here, that will reflect into these. Now, there are actually two more exceptions to this model. The dedicated SQL pool has its own authentication mechanism. You can create a SQL authentication and you can have the clients accessing your SQL pool from Management Studio or a different like SQL Server clients without even seeing the workspace UI, the Synapse Studio UI. That's possible because remember the SQL dedicated pools used to be called the SQL Data Warehouse, and it has its own authentication model. So that's still for backward compatibility, that's still available as well. Azure AD authentication. So you need to have Azure AD authentication to get access to the SQL dedicated pools here. And I will see this in a demo in a second when we have our first persona. When you are dealing with the storage account, so the storage account that is the primary storage account for Synapse or any storage account that you are dealing with, you need to have permission over the data plane of the storage account as well, because when you are in the UI for the Synapse workspace and you are browsing your storage account, you need to have access to it because that's using your identity. Because of these like two levels and the exception of the SQL pool and the different permissions, I'm getting lots of feedback about issues with the Synapse security and lots of misunderstanding. That's why I created this video. And to start doing this, we need to start with you. You are the one who create your own roles. The roles responsibilities depends on your organization and your work, your teams. That's all depends on your organization, not the technology, whether it's Synapse or something else. So it has to start from a place where you as a customer of Synapse, you need to define your own roles. So I had to come up by a hypothetical customer, which is basically a reflection of many customers I'm dealing with on daily basis. So these are the roles that I suggested. Admin, that is doing everything. This is the creator of the instance, of the workspace, and the one who is managing everything inside it. SQL Admin, this is the evolution of the SQL DBA. So that you are creating the schemas, you are running maintenance, you are doing the workload management, and many other SQL specific workloads. That's your role. So this is the SQL admin. This is the first role that we are having here, or first specialized role. After that, we have two data engineers. One will be working mainly with SQL language, that's their skill set, and the second one, PySpark or Scala. Mainly, they are working on Spark. Both of them will be working on pipelines, because you need pipelines either way. That's your orchestrator, and it helps you boosting your productivity. So in the SQL engineer, you need to get access to the pools, but not as a SQL admin with lower privilege. And you need to create and execute pipelines, but you are not allowed to do everything. For example, you're not allowed to create any linked service to any source, copy the data from any place to any other place. This has to be controlled. Similarly, in the data engineer Spark, they need to execute Spark notebooks, need to execute pipelines, but again, limited access to the linked services. The data platform engineer, I see the data platform engineer as a supervisor of these two. So this is the one that looks, maybe we can inject them into the CI/CD pipeline, review their commits, and make sure that the commits does not have anything that risk the platform. This data platform engineer is the one who controls everything ins and out of the analytics workspace. So they have the data engineer privilege plus the Spark data engineer for both SQL and Spark, plus access to all the linked services. Workspace reader, think about management, project management, any other business decision makers who see the notebooks as a way to have reporting. So you can have your notebooks as daily reporting, and you can let your business decision makers access it. In this case, you just need to give them reader permission to go through the notebooks and see the result of them. These are the roles that I had in my mind from my experience and from interaction with my customers. Now, with these roles, we need to pay attention to two different models of operation that Synapse is working on. The live mode, and in the live mode, in this case, you are, as a user of Synapse, you are writing an artifact. It can be a notebook, it can be an SQL script or a pipeline, and you publish it directly. There is no source control, there is no history. You publish, and once you are publishing your code, now you can use it for, like, you can create triggers and you can execute it, and so on and so forth. Before you publish, no one sees your changes. So if you created a new script file, until you publish it, no one sees it. It's only you can see it. It's your own workspace, your temporary space. And if you close the browser, you are losing your work. You have to publish it to keep it. So this is a straightforward way, an easy way. It's easy to understand. It doesn't have any requirements to understand source control and Git and branches and all this stuff. But at the same time, it removes some of the flexibility in the security that we can have. That makes us move to the source control mode. The source control mode, in this case, we are not publishing directly to this workspace. So I'm going to start first by working on my own branch, and then I will create a PR, a pull request, to merge my branch to the main branch, and then someone has to approve this. So this is one way for someone to interfere with my work and review it before it goes into the main branch. And then after it goes to the main branch, still not yet published in the workspace. From the main branch, we will do publishing, and in this case, that will move it from the source control into the production area of the workspace, where everyone can see it, and everyone can trigger pipelines and stuff like this. In this case, I have more control, and it's a granular control over different steps of the artifact evolution, which helps me for my security controls, but at the same time it has its own complexity, because it's not as straightforward as the live mode. Again, in our demos, we'll try to cover them both. So let's meet James. James is our DBA, experienced DBA. Him and his team, they are working with different tools. None of them is the Synapse Studio. Synapse Studio is for them something new, and it doesn't add any value for them. They have their own tools. They just need to have a SQL endpoint to connect to and execute their scripts. They do lots of SQL scripts, and they use their own Git repo that has scripts for SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, Synapse, and many other database systems, operational and analytics, because that's how they function. They don't need to use the integration between the Synapse Studio and Git, so they have a different requirements in this case. And it's actually very simple requirements, because all what they need, they just need to have a SQL pool access. Okay, so let's give them this. How can we do this? Because the dedicated SQL pools are the next generation coming from the SQL Data Warehouse, so we have to treat this differently. We should give them access using the create user from external provider statement, SQL statement, and it has to be given into the specific database, aka SQL pool. SQL pool right now equivalent to a database. Then we give them the permissions, either individual permissions or role membership, and there are differences in the syntax. We'll discuss them. However, for the serverless, we can do both. Serverless, we can use the same concepts, like create user from external provider, or we can do this using the Synapse SQL administrator that gives us the access to the serverless SQL pool. All right. So let's jump to the pools. So in this demo, we'll start by creating a new user. We need to pay attention where we are. So we are connected to one dedicated pool. It's called SmallDB, this is the database. We need to be in the user database context and create user, our username from external provider. That is this username in this case. It can be a user or it can be a group in Azure AD, and this is from external provider. This is the syntax that tells Synapse that this is coming from Azure AD, because it's the only external provider that is accepted in Synapse, at least for now. All right, so let's execute this one, and I will speak about database administrator in a second. So what is the database administrator? I thought we are speaking about James. Well, database administrator is the group that has James in it. So let's move to my Azure portal in Azure AD. This is my groups, and I created groups in my own tenant to replicate my use case. So database administrators, this is my group, and I have it with one member, and that's be James in this case. So right now, by giving the permission to the group, I'm implicitly giving the permission to James. If I'm connected to the dedicated pool, SP add role member, and I'm adding this group, Azure AD group, to the role member, the role DB owner. So let's execute this. Done. Let's do this as well for the serverless pool. So I'm going to go to the built-in, and I have a database called serverless DB, and let's do this. Now, if I execute the sp add role member, it will give me a syntax error. I have to use the more modern syntax alter role. So with this, let's give a chance to James to give it a try. So now James is connected to the Management Studio. That's their preferred tool. First, we'll try the serverless pools. So this is the on-demand connection, and in the options, I will go to the serverless DB. And here we go. James now is connected to the serverless pool. Select user name, and that's James' account. Okay, let's have another query window. And with the second query window, I need to connect to the dedicated pool. I'm in. And James is added here. Okay, so this is the first way to access it. Now in the serverless pool, there is another way. So I need to connect to the serverless, and I'm going to drop the user because I'm going to add them as a different way. Right now, they shouldn't access the serverless pool. However, I will go to the Synapse Access Control, and I'm going to add them as Synapse SQL Administrator. As you can see here, there is a scope. So I choose to have my role membership over the whole workspace or to a specific item. We'll speak about specific items later, but for this use case, we will cover the whole workspace. And the select user, database, and my group is picked up here. So let's do it. Now connected. Let's see how James would connect. So go back to the serverless pool. There you go. Now in this case, the difference that you'll see that the user is mapped to the DBO, because this is the same way. So the DBO is a built-in user that is used for mapping any sysadmin. That's the old SQL Server. So whenever you are a sysadmin logged into your SQL Server, you don't have to have a user in every user database, but you are mapped automatically to this user, which is the DBO user. So now James can act as a database administrator, sorry, a DB owner inside this database, and they can do all the tasks they need. Now let's meet our second role, the data engineer, the SQL specialized data engineer. So let's meet Omar. Omar, he uses SQL queries and pipelines. They have access to the limited data sources, so we need to have control over what data sources they can reach. He needs to publish his work, and he works under the supervision of the senior data platform engineer, which we will come to later. In this case, I'm representing this by our persona, Danielle, who should review his work before publishing. Danielle, she prefers that Omar shouldn't create any new linked services, and we'll speak about this preference at the end of our demo. How can we do something like this? So how can we solve this? Omar needs access to create pipelines, so he needs access to the UI, and this is the very first permission that we need to give. He can access the UI, however, to see the workspace from a drop-down, then we need to give him a reader role on the Azure level, on the Azure portal level. To publish, he needs to have a Synapse role, Synapse artifact publisher. The requirements to access limited data source, now we will play with this with the credentials. So in this case, we'll have for the first time permission not on the whole workspace, but on a specific credential, and we will use the user managed identities in this case. Supervise and review his work. Now we need to have source control. So first we'll try it on a live workspace, and then we'll move to the source control linked workspace, and we'll see how Git can help us with this, where Danielle can review Omar's commits. Prefer to not create linked services. We will handle this using GitHub. I don't have a complete pipeline for it, but the idea is straightforward from GitHub or DevOps perspective. We will cover this as well in the demo. Okay, so let's jump to the pipelines. So to give access to our data engineers, the persona Omar in our example, we have like different levels that we need to give access to. The very first one is the dedicated SQL pools and the serverless SQL pools if they want to use it as well. So we'll use the create user from external provider in this case, and we'll use it by, again, I'm using always Azure AD group, so I can easily add new members to this group without having to repeat this again. I'm giving the data engineers DB data reader, DB data writer. Of course, SQL has lots of flexibility when it comes to the database roles. You can have your own custom role, or you can use plenty of the other built-in roles. This is aside from our scope now. After we do this, so we created this and Omar now has access. The second thing that I need to do is I need to give Omar access to the workspace itself. So I'll do this by giving access here on the workspace as, artifact publisher, because Omar needs to publish. So data engineer SQL. So now Omar should be able to access it. So let's see here. I have Omar logged in, and let's refresh. We ask Omar in their onboarding to go to web.azuresynapse.net, and they will log in, and they should see the workspace. He does have access to the workspace, but the workspace does not show up here as part of his drop-down list in the UI. Okay, so let's try this. How about if we enter the workspace name manually? Can they access it? Yep, they do have access to it. So now Omar can access the workspace. They can see SQL scripts created before. This failed permission. This is related to the cost2 pools, or the Azure Data Explorer pools. They are a preview feature in the workspace. So it gives you this error, but it has nothing to do with the experience of the data engineers. Now we need to solve this issue. They do have access. However, it's inconvenient to log in and not see this workspace and have to enter the workspace name every time they log into this UI. Or, of course, they can bookmark the whole URL with the workspace in it. That's doable. But in case this is something that you are facing, to do this, we need to give Omar access, or his team access, to the workspace as a reader from the Azure level. So I want to do this on the whole resource group, just because I have other workspaces as well. You can do it on the workspace level or the whole resource group. It's up to you. And what I will do is I'm going to add a new role, reader, and I have a group called all users, so that will cover all my users. And after I logged out and logged in, I can see two workspaces. The one that we are working on right now is the live one. In this case, Omar can create a new SQL script. They can go to their, I didn't give them access yet to the serverless, so the serverless is inaccessible, but he can access the dedicated, and they can write any queries. Okay. Now, can Omar publish? Let's see. Yep, he can publish. Now, how about the pipelines? Let's have an experience with pipelines, and I'm interested in, so let's do this. I'm gonna go and create a pipeline. Let's create a new one. And I do have a problem here. I cannot test the connection or the linked service. So I'm seeing here the default linked service, and I don't have permission, and the permission is to use the credentials. So I need to use the credentials. Now, what are the credentials? If I go back to my admin UI, under manage credentials, there is one default credentials always available. This is the credential that is representing the managed identity. So when you are using the managed identity in your pipelines to access a data lake, or even in the UI, when you want to test the connection or something like this, we are using these credentials. Now, this is the managed identity of the workspace, which is nice. I can give it lots of permissions on different data stores, data lakes, blob storage, SQL servers, and other relational engines. But once you give permission to this credential, now the user who has the permission, our data engineer in our case, will have access to all these. They can create pipelines to all these. Now, one of the requirements is to have access to a limited set of linked services. That makes us think of using another credentials that are mapped not to the managed identity, but a user managed identity, so I can have more control over it. So starting with managed identity, I already created one. So when I go to managed identities, I see the user defined managed identities. So what's the difference between user-defined and the system-assigned managed, or user managed identities and the system-assigned managed identities? System-assigned managed identity, the lifetime of the identity is the same as the lifetime of the resource. So when you create a Synapse workspace and it's automatically done, like there always has been a managed identity associated with it. The managed identity is created with the workspace, and if you deleted the workspace, the managed identity will be deleted with it. You can use it for giving access to different data stores. By default, the primary data lake is the workspace is giving access to the primary data lake using this managed identity. But you will have a need to have more granular permissions or access. So you are not, if you have only the system identities, then first you have to repeat every time you create a workspace, you have to repeat giving the permission to the managed identity of this new workspace, just like the workspace before it, on all the data stores. Second, once a user has access to the credential that is representing this identity, they can access all the data stores. Now, in case I need to have another managed identity, in this case it's a user managed identity, I'm creating it from the portal here. I can use it to give permission to only maybe one part of my data lake, only one folder in my data lake. I'm giving permission to this one. So if my user, the data engineer, has access to this credential, then my user will have only access to this part of the data lake. So this is the idea behind it. Anyways, I created one here, and I need to associate this one with my workspace. So I'll go back to my resource group here, and we'll go to my workspace, this one, identity, and I want to add, and here you go. I have now a new identity associated with my workspace. This does not negate the system assigned managed identity. This is always there, but this is a new identity now. After doing this, I want to go back to my admin UI, and I'll go to the credentials. I want to create another credential, and user mi, let's call it manage identity 01, user assigned manage identity. Okay, it's not published yet. I want to publish it. Now, after doing this, what I need to do is I need to go to my access control, and I will add. So for the permissions that I need to give here, I want to do it on the credential level. Now I have two credentials. I have the workspace credential and I have the user managed identity that I have. I will first choose the user managed identity and Synapse credential user, data engineers, SQL, apply, and I want to give them permission over the system managed identity as well, because this is required for the debugging, and that's why we need to design this carefully. The system managed identity should not have any excessive permission other than the primary data lake for this workspace. So the system managed identity have access only to the primary data lake. The other data sources, the other like relational databases, the upstreams, anything else, I should use the user managed identities. So I'm going to go to credential as well. Workspace system identity, credential user. Okay, so now I give the two permissions. I can now go and test. So I need to create a new data set. Binary. And a new linked service. This linked service would use the user defined managed identity. We are not connecting with the key, we are connecting with a user assigned managed identity. And I don't have permission over the whole storage account, I have permission over a specific part of it. Data sets. Test, and successful. So this way I solved the problem of not giving access to everything. They should have access to only specific accounts. So again, this is important. How to do this? Give the minimum permission to the system managed identity, and then any upstream systems, you give them permissions using user assigned managed identity, and give specific users or groups access to these managed identities through credentials. Okay, so this is all good, and I'm done the demo part here for the live workspace. I need to move to another workspace that has two things. First, it has source control enabled. Second, it has managed virtual network. How can we work with the managed VNet? We will see that in a moment. I'm now in a different workspace, and to see the difference here, once I go to the development blade, it will show me that this workspace is attached to a Git repo, and you need to choose your branch to start working on. So if you are just browsing and you will not create anything new, you can use the main. However, if you are about to create something new, then I will create a new branch. I'm gonna call it Omar B. So this is the workspace for Omar to start working on it. All right. So typically, like the DevOps is not the scope of this video, but typically you start by your own branch or a feature branch for the feature that you are about to create, and then once you finish, you create a pull request to merge it with the main branch. However, that's beyond the scope of this video. For now, we will go and I'm gonna create a pipeline. I want to test in pipelines something, because here this workspace is also having managed identity and managed VNet. And if you want to know more about managed virtual network and the network security in Synapse generally, I just created a video last week. You will find it in the same YouTube channel or in one of the social media accounts. I'm sure you will find your way for it's titled Synapse Network Security. It's a deep dive, an hour-long session, and you will find more details about it. So for now, I want to copy the data. Let's go to the source, and I'm going to choose my data set here. I want to open my data set, and you'll see something new here. Interactive authoring disabled. So I need to enable it, otherwise I cannot test my connection. So this connection is disabled because my interactive authoring is disabled. Interactive authoring is a property of integration runtime. Now, I got this question as well from my customers about what permission is needed to enable the interactive authoring. If I try to enable it right now, the interactive authoring. Okay, so I want to show you this. So typically, without any extra permissions, the user will fail. In this case, our user succeeded, and that was because I did not remove the permission. So when we look here, this is the access control for our workspace, and I give our user Omar here permission over a new role I created. It's called Synapse Interactive Authoring. So let's go to this role. The role has two permissions: create or update integration runtime, write permission over it, and enable interactive authoring or interactive query on integration runtime. Let's look at the JSON, and these are the two actions that I have here. Integration runtimes, enable interactive query action, and integration runtimes write. With these two, the user can enable the interactive authoring and they can work fine without any problem. So that's the custom role that I created. I will publish it in my GitHub repo, and you can have access to it. Okay, so now my user can work even inside the managed VNet, can enable the interactive authoring without having any extra permissions. They are just artifact publisher. He can publish as well in this one. However, there is one minor issue. So let's see something here. So I don't care about this one for now. So let's say the user will add a comment here on this script, and we need to commit it. The commit will happen in OMRB branch, so I'm gonna commit it. Now it's committed. I will, after that, I will do pull request, which will open my DevOps. And I will create the PR, complete. Typically, in a production environment, you will not have the users allowed to merge directly. There will be a branch policy that prevents direct merge, and you have to have a reviewer to review it. And this is one of the requirements, because we said that Danielle, the platform platform engineer, should review any commits before they are merged into the main branch. Okay, so right now it's in the main branch, and I can go back here and I can do main branch, and it will show me this one with the comment. However, until now it's not published yet. Well, what does it make? Is there a difference here? Well, for SQL scripts, no, there is no difference. But think about this from the pipeline perspective. If you would like to schedule this pipeline to run on a schedule every day, the schedule will give you an error unless your pipeline is published, because the published space in the workspace, this is the production area where you can use pipeline to be picked up by schedules and something like this. For SQL scripts, for notebooks, no, it's like, well, users don't need to publish them to use them. However, of course, it's a good thing to have it published. But in pipelines, this is critical in this case. And when users are publishing, what will happen is the artifacts will be published, and then in this case it's only one, that is the script, and then the whole workspace, there will be an ARM template generated, and this ARM template generated will be put into another branch, and this branch is called here. So if I go to my branches, workspace publish. So workspace publish, the last change happened yesterday. So when I do publish here, it tells me there is only one script to be published. I say okay. Publishing succeeded and it's completed. Generating the template, it shows me an error message, and the error message that this user does not have a right permission over the workspace, the whole workspace. Now, do we need to give them right permission over the workspace? This is typically done by giving them the Synapse contributor, either on either on the workspace level or the Azure level. But do we need to do this? Let's see. It says it's failed, but when I look here at my DevOps, the last change is just now. So the generation happened for the ARM template, and I can see ARM template here. And it just created and it's pushed. So this error message, it's just a notification for the user, and I believe that will be removed. A notification for the user that the user does not have permission to write to this workspace. So if this user tried to copy the ARM template or take the ARM template and to try to deploy it over the same workspace, the user does not have permission to do this. However, the ARM template is generated and it's copied to the branch workspace publish. Okay, so am I worried about this? Not really. It's an error message that I'd rather not to satisfy by giving the user a write permission. Otherwise, in this case, this user will have like higher privilege over the workspace than just the ability to publish artifacts. But this artifact is now published, and we can do this and test it by another thing. I'm gonna do a pipeline. This is my pipeline, and I'm going to change here. I'm going to change the name of the pipeline as well. Okay, I'm in the main branch. I will commit it. Shouldn't be committed to the main branch directly, not the best practices, but I will do it quickly right now. And I will publish. I can only publish from the main branch. So I have the pipeline, that's a different name. Publish complete. However, generating a script is getting us the error. Now let's see if the publish is valid or not. And it's published. Now I'm gonna leave the login with my data engineer, and I will go to my admin. Okay, I see now the new name, and I can add a trigger now, and I can trigger it. If it's not published, I will not be able to add a trigger because the workspace does not see it in the production area yet. Okay. All right. I can do the triggering by a schedule as well, and we have different types of schedules, as you can see here. All right. So far, this user can publish, as we mentioned, but the user cannot do any scheduling for pipelines. We are keeping this is as per the requirements, because we're keeping this to the platform data engineer, not the SQL data engineers or the Spark data engineer. The one who will do the scheduling will be the platform data engineer. Okay. So back to our slides now. Back to our next persona, and in this case, this is the data engineer Spark, or Spark data engineers. Data engineer, but they are working mainly with notebooks. Our next persona is Emmy. So let's meet Emmy. Emmy's main tool are notebooks that runs on Spark clusters and pipelines to orchestrate them. Emmy is skilled in Python, so she's a Python developer, and she always uses Git. So the Git integration is important for Emmy in this case. She wants to publish her code and pipeline, but she should have limited access to the number of data sources. So we will do the same trick as we did with Omar before. Emmy is working under supervision of the senior data platform engineer, Danielle, the same case, who should review Emmy's work before publishing. And the last point is Danielle prefers that Emmy does not create a new linked service. So how can we solve the requirements for Emmy? First, to access the UI, we need to give her the Azure Azure Reader role. To publish, we need to give her the artifacts publisher. In Emmy's case, she needs to start and stop and use Spark clusters. So we will give her Synapse Compute Operator. Now, here is one thing. We can give her Synapse Compute Operator, which will give her like permission over any Spark cluster inside the workspace. And this is actually better or more flexible because Danielle can create any cluster and automatically Amy can have access to it. And we will see Danielle's role after, but this is flexible and I like it this way. In case you have many people in the same workspace and you need to give them a specific cluster to access and nothing else, then in this case, you can give them permission over a specific cluster if you prefer. But for my model, I'm comfortable with giving the Spark Data Engineers Synapse Compute Operator, which will allow them to compute any Spark cluster. Access to limited data source, permission on credentials, the same trick that we did with Omar before. Permission to enable interactive authoring, custom RBAC, the same thing. Supervise and review her work, use get. The last point, I didn't spend much time on this one, so prefer not to create linked services. We will speak about this from the DevOps perspective. So we need to do this using DevOps pipelines or GitHub Actions, and I will highlight it at the beginning of our demo. Okay, so let's see the demo. This demo for the permissions required for Emmy, the Spark Data Engineer. So if you look at the Data Engineer Spark, what permissions we are giving them already, we give them the Spark Artifact Publisher, similar to the SQL counterpart. We are giving them Compute Operator. This is unique to the Spark Data Engineers. We are giving them access to credentials. In this workspace, I'm not using user managed identity, but we already saw this in the previous demo. And with this, we should see what Amy is capable of doing. So I'm going to go back here. When we go to the development, Amy is already on her branch. I already chose the branch. When I logged in, let's do a notebook. We can choose our Spark cluster. So right now, this will start my cluster. Executing here my cell, which entails starting my cluster. So the Spark session will start. I'm gonna pause the video for a few seconds. Right, it took of course more than a few seconds. It took almost 3 minutes to start and execute. Now my cluster is starting, and Emmy, with like the Spark Data Engineer, she managed to execute her notebook. She can commit as well, and then because she has the publisher permission, she can publish the same way as the SQL Data Engineer before her. What about managing the pool? So let's change something in our pool. For example, I need to change the number of nodes. Failed because I don't have permission. So I can use the Spark pool, but I cannot change it. I cannot create a new pool as well, which is a good situation, or a good control over my resources, because I don't want to have my data engineers using resources without a proper permission and workflow for approving these. Okay, the last part I want to cover before I end this demo is how can I control that Emmy and before her Omar cannot create anything, a new linked service, because Danielle, their manager or their supervisor, she doesn't want them to create new linked services. So there is no permission for no linked services in Synapse, at least for now. There is one that you can do custom role in Data Factory, and I did this before in Data Factory. But for Synapse, there is no one yet. So the trick to do this is to do it from Git. and any linked service will always be in the same folder. So all what you need to do in your branches, and I'm going to show you just the beginning of it. I'm going to give you the lead and then you continue on this. The main branch, I can do something here called branch policies. And in branch policies, I can do build validation, where I create or I execute a pipeline, and based on this pipeline, I will validate the PR, the pull request, or not. Basically, what I need to do in this PR, using any like bash script or PowerShell, I need to get a list of the new files created, and if there is a new file created in the linked service or even updated in the linked service folder, and the author or the committer is not of the approved list, then I will fail the pipeline. So that's in a nutshell. Of course, the details is different between DevOps and GitHub, and this might be another video dedicated for the CI/CD, but that's it for this demo. Back to our presentation, and we will meet the boss of the data engineers, Danielle. So Danielle is the goalkeeper of the platform. Her role is data platform engineer. So she doesn't pay attention to the specifics. She takes care of the whole platform safety and security. So the getting data from outside our data lake into the data lake, is it from a trusted source or not? Do the data engineers using the approved list of linked services or sources or not? Now, regarding which folder the data engineer will put the data in, this is particulars that the data platform engineers will not pay attention to. Data platform engineer will take care of the platform as a whole. She also reviewed the Git commits to make sure that everything is in place. We can use automation. So I've seen different customers with different maturity levels when it comes to the CI/CD automations. Some of them, they are doing everything automated. Some of them, they still require human reviews. She can create Spark clusters when needed, and once she creates them, automatically the Emmy, our Spark data engineer, will have access to them, and she can use them right away. She creates new linked services, working with the cloud team to maintain the RBAC between the managed identities and the data source. With these requirements, let's see how can we solve them. Danielle requirements are easier to solve because we can map them to a Synapse contributor role, and the Synapse contributor, we give it from inside the Synapse access control from the Synapse Studio. And with this, she can have all the access to the Spark pool, to the SQL clusters. If she needs to have permissions over the dedicated SQL pool, she needs to get access separately. So this is using the create user statement. With this, we just complement this by the DevOps or GitHub pipelines/actions to control who commits new files in the linked service folder, as I explained to you. And that's it. That's all what we need for our data platform engineers. Thank you for watching the video so far. That concludes the Azure Synapse Analytics roles and responsibility. We discussed so far the SQL Admin role, the data engineer, the SQL data engineer, the Spark data engineer, the data platform engineer. These are hypothetical roles I came up with, and every role has its own requirements, and we discussed how to solve these in both the live Synapse and the source control linked Synapse. We also discussed some special tips about giving the minimum permission for something like interactive authoring and stuff like this. Thank you. Reach out to me if you have any questions or feedback through social media, and see you soon. Thank you.